78th birthday party in celebration of his life. I know a lot of you probably didn't come down here. You probably didn't come down here for his party. I know you just hang out in bars on Sunday afternoons anyway. But he would appreciate that. And on behalf of my mom and me, folks, let's recognize my dad's soulmate and partner of 55 years, my mom. Folks, my mom and I have been very gratified to see all of the outpouring of messages and emotion that's been on Facebook and on the internet. But I want to recognize that probably the best tribute that I've seen to my dad has not been on Facebook. It's that even after he died, people are still writing on bathroom walls for a good time called Tom Dodd. Folks, for a good time called Tom Dodd. Always remember that. I know that most of you hippie commie pinkos who went to school with him, I had to put up with in my house and my float all these years. Now you're coming to celebrate your teacher and your relative and his life, and we appreciate your being here. But folks, I want to remember one thing. When I was a kid, maybe he taught you this too. Because somebody said that I was an only child, but obviously that's not true. Tom Dodd had thousands of kids, boys and girls both, and you were all my brothers and sisters. And I appreciate it. And I know he probably shared with you this lesson when I was a kid, that my dad taught us that if there are bad words, there are bad numbers, too. Does anybody remember the bad number? I don't want you to say it out loud, because you don't want to say this in mixed company. Does anybody know the bad number? Here we go. My dad said that was a bad number. You don't want to say that out loud. But you know, sometimes there's a time to let off some steam. A time when you want to cuss out loud. Like when you hear that Tom Dodd has died. So what do you say to that bullshit? 6 and 7 days. Well, folks, we thank you very much for turning out. There are a few people here today who would like to say a few things about Tom Dodd. Why don't we start with Barry LaRue? Folks, here's Barry.
Thanks, Greg. So I was a kid at Roosevelt School and I loved art. And when they hired Tom as the art teacher at Roosevelt School, the old lab school at ENU, that was about the fall of 1964. And my favorite place to hang out was the art room. And I'm sure that everyone who went to Roosevelt can appreciate the fact that the art room was a welcoming place where you could hang out. And Tom would have all sorts of interest areas going. He had all sorts of pre-student teachers and student teachers. And he ran a rather unconventional kind of classroom, shall we say. I mean, he had us gathered around the table reading. He was reading a book called The Last Days of Dachau about the concentration camp. I mean, that sounds kind of weird, but we all were wrapped while we were doing our drawing and painting or work with clay or whatever, linoleum blocks. You know, we were listening to Tom, often reading from interesting literature and telling us stories like The Flying Bedstead, which were stories, bedtime stories that he used to tell Greg when he was, 3, 4, 5 years old, and he'd repeat and those stories to us at school, the next day. Some of the vignettes that I remember of Tom from that era in the 1960s were things like he had a class build a airplane, and in order to test it, he filled it full of rocks and ran it on a wire off the parapet of Roosevelt down to the ground. Okay, he tested it the day before. The problem is when they had the real launch of the plane the next day, they forgot to take the rocks out of it. And so they shot it off the roof, and it took a nosedive and crashed right into the lawn. And Tom was running around. All the schools went out into the lawn of the school to watch the launching of this thing. And Tom was in a World War II jumpsuit with goggles and a scarf, looking like some I don't know, just some sort of nut from another era, So he looked like an old 1920s airline mechanic. It was pretty cool. The painted on the door of the art room the last couple of years, it said Uncle Tom's Cabin, and that was the art room. It was white with black lettering, and of course, even probably at some of the schools in Ann Arbor, he referred to his kids as Dodd's children, right? Because of the old motorcycle gang. For Depot Town devotees, back in the 60s, he and Max Obermeyer ran the Old Town Bazaar, just a couple doors from here, and sold antiques and consignment items and that sort of thing. And speaking of for a good time called Tom Dodd, he drew in magic marker all over the bathroom walls, and he had a fictitious city with a movie marquee on it that said Enema Cinema, which was totally appropriate to a bathroom. And as a 10-year-old, I thought that was extremely funny. But maybe that's what his sense of humor appealed to 10-year-olds. I'm not sure. The other thing that he did, and I'm mostly trying to go over Roosevelt stuff, just remembering things like he used to show silent films on the side of the building on the weekend occasionally, and I remember seeing Elmo Lincoln starring in Tarzan of the Apes, which is about 1918 silent film, and we're all just sitting out in the faculty parking lot watching a silent film, just sort of crazy stuff. He was also the technical director of Finian's Rainbow, and I remember on opening night, he pinned some signs up on the teaser so that when the curtain opened, the lead could see it said, "Sharon, your slip is showing." And let's see. Well, the one thing, I was the editor of the middle school newspaper when Roosevelt closed, and I asked him to write something on the final copy of the paper, and he wrote, "Art is long, life is short." And I guess I can think of no other epitaph for Tom than, art is long, life is short, and let's hear it for good, creative teachers.